What if I told you that during World War II there were weapons so advanced they seemed straight out of a science fiction novel? Weapons that, if they had been ready in time, could have changed the course of history. The Third Reich was a machine obsessed with technology and military innovation. While battles were fought on the front lines, in hidden laboratories and factories, Nazi engineers and scientists worked on projects ranging from supersonic rockets to giant cannons capable of destroying entire cities. Some of these developments were actually used, like the famous V-2 rocket that fell on London. Others never went beyond the experimental phase, but still fascinate us today for how ahead of their time they were. Jet fighters, colossal tanks, radar invisible planes, and even the first steps toward what we now know as nuclear weapons. In this video, we are going to uncover the most powerful and secret weapons of the Third Reich. From those that changed the course of the war to those that remained technological fantasies. We'll analyze how they worked, their impact, and how close they really came to giving Hitler an impossible victory. Stay until the end, because some of these weapons still inspire theories and legends that connect real history with myth. Were these weapons the last desperate attempt of a collapsing regime? Or a glimpse into the future of warfare? The V-1 and V-2 rockets, the first weapons of retaliation. In 1944, when the Third Reich began losing ground on every front, Hitler decided to strike back in a way the world had never seen before. He ordered a campaign of terror against England using what he called the Wunderwaffen, the miracle weapons. The result was the V-1 and V-2, the first guided weapons and the first ballistic missiles in history. The V-1, nicknamed the Buzz Bomb, was a small pilotless aircraft loaded with explosives. It ran on a pulse jet engine that produced a very distinctive sound, a loud buzzing that could be heard from the ground. Londoners quickly learned to fear that noise. As long as you could hear it, the bomb was still flying. But when the sound stopped, it meant it was falling. In total, more than 9,000 V-1s were launched against England, killing thousands, injuring many more, and forcing the population to spend weeks in air raid shelters. But the truly revolutionary weapon was the V-2. Unlike the V-1, it could not be intercepted or shot down. It was the world's first ballistic missile. It was almost 14 meters tall, weighed over 12 tons, and traveled at supersonic speeds, reaching the edge of space before plunging down in a devastating arc. It struck without warning, without any sound of approach, turning it into an even more terrifying psychological weapon. Behind this project was Wernher von Braun, a young engineer who would later work for NASA and play a key role in the Apollo program that took humankind to the moon. Ironically, the very technology that terrorized London would decades later power space exploration. The use of these weapons had a major propaganda impact, but militarily they failed to change the outcome of the war. Each V-2 was enormously expensive to produce and had poor accuracy. Many landed in residential areas with no strategic value. Worse still, their production relied on the forced labor of prisoners in the underground Mittelbau-Dora camp, where thousands died under inhuman conditions. Even so, these weapons marked the beginning of the missile age. The world realized that from then on, the sky itself could become a battlefield, even from thousands of kilometers away. The V-2 was the direct ancestor of modern missiles and the very concept of long-distance warfare as we know it today. The Messerschmitt Me 262, the plane that could have changed the war. While the Allies dominated the skies in 1944, German engineers were working on a project that seemed straight out of science fiction. The Messerschmitt Me 262, the first operational jet fighter in history. This aircraft, nicknamed Schwalbe, Swallow, could reach speeds over 850 kilometers per hour. far faster than any Allied fighter of the time. Its futuristic design and jet engines gave it an incredible advantage. It could attack enemy bombers and vanish before their escorts had time to react. The Me-262 was armed with 4 30mm cannons, powerful enough to bring down a heavy bomber with a single burst. There were even fighter bomber and reconnaissance variants developed. In theory, a large fleet of these jets could have shifted the balance of air power and delayed the Allied invasion. But the project suffered from fatal delays. Hitler, obsessed with turning the Me-262 into a fast bomber to strike London, ordered modifications to its original design, delaying mass production by months. By the time it finally entered service, in mid-1944, it was already too late. The Luftwaffe was weakened, its veteran pilots were mostly dead, and the Reich no longer had enough fuel to operate these aircraft on a sustained basis. Even so, the Me-262 managed to wreak havoc. It is estimated that they shot down over 500 Allied planes in the final months of the war. Allied pilots quickly learned to ambush them during takeoff or landing, when they were most vulnerable, because in the air they were nearly untouchable. Beyond its immediate impact, the Me-262 paved the way for modern aviation. The Allies carefully studied captured units, and within a few years, every major military power was developing jet fighters based on that technology. In a way, the Me-262 was not just a weapon of the Third Reich. It was the opening chapter of the jet age that still rules the skies today. Its story is a reminder of how technological innovation can leap decades ahead of its time, but also how poor strategic decisions can doom even the most advanced weapons. The Reich's super projects: giant cannons, sonic weapons, and nuclear dreams. If the Messerschmitt Me-262 seemed ahead of its time, what came next looked like something straight out of a science fiction novel. Nazi Germany was not content with tanks and planes. It sought weapons that could change the course of the war with a single blow. The Gustav gun, the monster of steel. Among these weapons, none was as impressive as the Schwerer Gustav, the largest cannon ever built. It weighed 1,350 tons, stretched almost 47 meters in length, and could fire shells weighing 7 tons at targets more than 40 kilometers away. Its main purpose was to destroy fortifications that could not be taken down by conventional weapons. It was deployed during the siege of Sevastopol in 1942. Where it managed to pierce underground bunkers and destroy ammunition depots buried beneath meters of concrete. But its enormous size was also its greatest weakness. It took weeks to assemble, required thousands of men to operate, and was an easy target for Allied aircraft. In practice, the Gustav was more of a propaganda weapon than a truly decisive one. The V3 cannon, the London gun. In addition to the infamous V1 and V2 rockets, the Nazis also developed the V3, a multi-charge, long-range cannon designed to bombard London from France. It worked with a system of explosive charges placed along the barrel that boosted the projectile to supersonic speeds. Although several installations were built, they were destroyed by Allied bombing before they could enter large-scale operation. Energy weapons and sonic cannons. Hitler's obsession, and that of his closest circle, with miracle weapons, led to projects that bordered on the impossible. They designed sonic cannons capable, at least in theory, of emitting low-frequency waves to cause nausea, disorientation, or even kill by vibrating internal organs. These projects never went beyond the prototype phase, but they illustrate the desperation of the Reich in the final months of the war. The German nuclear project. Perhaps the most feared idea of all, the possibility that the Nazis could develop an atomic bomb before the Allies. It is true that scientists such as Werner Heisenberg worked on the German nuclear program, but it never had the logistical support or the massive funding of the Manhattan Project. Germany lacked enough enriched uranium and did not have the reactors needed to produce plutonium in useful quantities. However, documents discovered after the war confirm that the Reich came closer than previously believed to building a radiological weapon, a so-called dirty bomb, capable of contaminating entire cities. The fantastic weapons, the sun gun. Among the strangest projects was the idea of a giant orbital mirror that, once placed in space, could concentrate sunlight onto a single point on Earth and burn entire cities. This project, known as the Sonnengewehr, the sun gun, never left the drawing board, but it shows just how far the Reich's imagination tried to push the limits of possibility. These weapons represent Nazi Germany's last desperate attempt to reverse its fate. Some were real and deadly, others remained as sketches or prototypes, but they all share one thing: the obsession with creating a single, decisive strike that would make the entire world tremble. The human cost of their construction. Behind the apparent technological brilliance of these weapons lay a terrible price. Their production was carried out under inhuman conditions. The underground factories of Mittelwerk, where the V-2 rockets were built, relied on prisoners from the Dora Mittelbau concentration camp. It is estimated that over 20,000 prisoners died from exhaustion, malnutrition, or executions, a number higher than the total victims of the V-2 attacks themselves. This makes the V-2 a doubly sinister weapon. It not only killed on the enemy front, but its very manufacture was itself a war crime. Legacy of the V-weapons. Although they failed to change the outcome of the war, the V-1 and V-2 marked the beginning of a new era. After Germany's surrender, the United States and the Soviet Union raced to capture the scientists and technology of Peenemünde. Wernher von Braun himself was taken to the U.S. under Operation Paperclip and became the father of the American space program, responsible for the Saturn V rocket that took humanity to the moon in 1969. In other words, the same minds that built Hitler's weapons of vengeance would later power humanity's journey into space. A chilling reminder of how science and war are often intertwined throughout history. Throughout this journey, we have seen how the Third Reich poured colossal amounts of resources, science, and human lives into creating some of the most advanced and terrifying weapons of its time. From colossal tanks like the Maus, to jet fighters like the Me-262, and finally the V-1 and V-2 rockets that foreshadowed the age of intercontinental missiles. Hitler and his generals dreamed of an arsenal capable of changing the fate of the war, and in some cases, they came dangerously close. But the cost was enormous. Thousands of prisoners died producing these weapons, and European cities paid in blood for every new, technological miracle of the Reich. Behind each project lay a mix of ambition, desperation, and fanaticism that ultimately accelerated the regime's own downfall. Historically, these weapons mark a turning point. The world saw that the future of war would no longer depend solely on soldiers and artillery, but on science, industry, and advanced technology. The race for modern armament did not end in 1945. In fact, World War II was the starting point of the Cold War, the nuclear arms race, and the development of increasingly sophisticated weapons. And this is where we must pause and reflect. Every technological breakthrough raises the question of how it will be used. The same engineering that launched missiles at London sent humans to the moon. The same physics that created weapons of mass destruction opened the door to the nuclear power that lights our cities today. The legacy of the Third Reich's secret weapons is a warning. It reminds us that technology, in the wrong hands, can become the means of inflicting suffering on an industrial scale. But it also shows us that human knowledge is ambivalent. It can destroy, but it can also build. These weapons did not win the war for Hitler, but they did change the world forever. They left us a lesson we are still learning today. Technological progress without ethics is a threat to us all. History is there to remind us just how far humanity can go, and to warn us not to repeat the same mistakes.
The spaceship was born.